we're going to move right from that to the macro policy environment. All eyes on Wednesday, 2 p.m. next week, when the next monetary policy statement comes out, into what The Economist magazine had as its word of the year last year, which was AI, artificial intelligence. Professor Anna Strutt will lead the discussion, and we have an excellent panel of practitioners and experts to talk us through the world of AI. We will go until just after noon, then we'll take a break for about an hour for lunch, so we'll get you fed then. Enjoy the discussion. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks very much, Matt. Kia ora, everybody. It's delightful to be back at the Economics Forum again this year. Well, we're moving to a somewhat different topic from monetary policy, although it's a topic. We're moving on to artificial intelligence, which of course has got the potential to have impacts at the macro level, the way that it's pervading through so many different aspects of life these days. The topic is artificial intelligence, overhyped or the great disruption. It's something that we're all pretty much dealing with these days, including in the university, where our students are showing a remarkable ability to quickly learn these tools. We have three fantastic panelists. We have Brandon Hutcheson, who is the CEO of Aware Group. We have Dr. Amanda Williamson, who is currently the National Generative AI Lead at Deloitte. And we have Glen Willoughby, who is the CEO at Staples VR, and he's also an advisor to NASA on emerging technologies. All of our panelists also have really strong University of Waikato links, which is wonderful. Amanda remains affiliated with Waikato Management School, which is fantastic. And the other two are graduates of the University of Waikato, and of course we're very proud of them. It's a big topic. It's a huge topic. We've got a very short space of time to work on it. Our panelists have got lots of insights they're going to bring to you. It's indeed, two of them were on the breakfast show yesterday morning. You might have seen them. But we're looking forward to the insights we're going to bring. They're going to bring to this. We're going to begin with allowing them a few minutes to make some opening remarks. And then once those opening remarks are completed, we'll move to the questions. So please do get those questions in on Slido, and we'll draw as much as we can on the expertise and the insights of our fantastic panelists here. So with that, let's turn directly to you, Brandon.
Cool. Let's jump straight into it. So I guess my opening remarks start with 10 years ago, AI, I guess, was a lot more purely within the academia side of New Zealand. Commercially, we didn't really double down or invest significant amounts into it. 7 years ago, this is when the hype really started. Everyone was doing POCs, trying stuff. I think overall it was about between 8 to 11% of each of those proof of concepts turned into actual productionized AI. 5 years ago, we started globally investing in AI infrastructure. This was through cloud services. This was through the way that modernization of digital platforms was taking place. 3 years ago, we started the big debate and the conversation around ethics, bias, and everything else that we're still constantly working through. About a year ago, we democratized the freedom of being able to use creativity to understand AI. ChatGPT, everything else. That's the only time I'm going to bring that one up. But it allowed everyone to visualize what the benefit of AI was without having to have an actual expert or have the trust in it. We could actually enjoy and see the benefit. Disruption isn't because of technology. It comes down to the change that technology can actually make. The change is the actual disruption itself. Around the world, there is four key strategies or systems that are actually taking place in regards to the adoption of AI. The first one is do nothing. Pretty self-explanatory. The second one is where New Zealand sits. We currently sit in something called the paralysis strategy. We over-regulate, we over-govern, we restrict the ability to be agile and actually jump onto the points of disruption. We've gone from, I think it was 9th in ranking about 15 years ago to 13th, and now we're 40th in the world on AI. It's quite a drastic drop over the last 15 years. The third is imitation strategy, which the likes of Germany and France. They copy other people. It's not created to enable a system where it's actually adaptable to the local customs or culture. And then there's the fourth, which is what I consider the core strategy, or the most optimal. And this is the likes of, yes, controversially, Singapore, but also China. It's providing those core problems and allowing both the public and private sector to solve them without the government getting in the way. Done.
Oh, thanks for that great intro. Look, as we probably know, AI really hit the global consciousness with ChatGPT. It wasn't that long ago that we thought the pinnacle of artificial intelligence were driverless cars. And we now know there's not actually that much AI in driverless cars. Our expectations have rapidly changed to AI bordering on human intelligence. AI is an exponential technology. So what does that mean? I'm going to just list a couple of examples over years around things that have shocked most practitioners who have spent their careers in AI, which is not me. I've only been involved in the last 8 years. In 2016, AlphaGo, a deep mind now owned by Google, beat the world champion in the board game Go. That wasn't expected to happen for another 20 years. At NASA, in 2018, we used AI to develop technologies to shift asteroids and remove an extinction-level event, which we thought we could never do, which is quite a handy thing to have up your sleeve if we need it. Last year, AlphaGo and the leader of that program, Demis, won the Nobel laureate for chemistry with protein folding, opening up great opportunities around healthcare, climate tech, and biodiversity, providing opportunities we could never have imagined. To echo Matt Bolger at the start of this, look, the students at the back, they're going to have to deal with all of the headaches that their predecessors have created. The great news is they will have tools to deal with these problems that we can't even imagine now. The rate of AI change is staggering, and each project that I'm either observed or partly involved in is surprising what is achieved by it. So there is at one end, relatively simple AI, ChatGPT. It's an organization of the internet's knowledge in a plain English way. And we are now all potential Pulitzer Prize-winning quality authors in using these tools, which is great for me, who's hugely dyslexic and barely has a spelling of a 12-year-old. The other opportunity we have for New Zealand is, do we become a leader or do we become a follower? And how do we take such a rapidly evolving technology that is very extreme? So everything about AI tends to be magnified. The fear of AI, the opportunities that it can create, the issues around risks, the issues around just sheer survivability of companies. Are they going to be taken out by AI? Who is going to do that? So there's a lot of hysteria, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's to be expected because the technology is moving at such a rapid rate. Things at New Zealand that I didn't fully appreciate till I left were unique things about New Zealand that no other country has. We are a small population, but we are massively talented. We have a history of successful adoption of new technologies. And New Zealand was the first in online banking. We were the first to adopt electronic clinical records before any other country. And the challenge around New Zealand and where we fit in the world could be, what is the place of stability that lends to our strengths? The biggest difficulty in AI is not the tools. The biggest difficulty is how to apply them in effective and safe ways to deliver good outcomes. Essentially, how do you innovate with new things? And New Zealand has a superpower in this. There's been a number of New Zealanders come and go at NASA. And our reputation at NASA is extremely high. One of the early founders of NASA was a New Zealander, Dr. William Pickering, and we've had a few exceptionally good scientists come and go throughout NASA. And one of the things they say is, you Kiwis are great, you just know it can't be done. And we tend to do it. Rocket Lab is an exemplar of when the stars align. We had under the Key government a platform where government supported the emergence of an entirely new industry, the space industry. We had Peter Beck and his team really dogged determination to do something, and we had early capital investment by Stephen Tyndall, Tim Williams, and then Kozler Venture Funds at Silicon Valley. And who would have thought out of New Zealand comes the most staggering innovation in space exploration in the last 20 years around private rockets. So we have an ability to transform, we have an ability to move in a fast, quickly. The question for New Zealand is, are we willing to do it? We have everything that other countries would dream of having. We have very few barriers in reality. But are we going to lead this, or are we going to follow this? This week, the European Union announced a $200 billion investment in AI to help fund their position. Funding is one thing, but what we have in spades is the ability to innovate successfully and rapidly using a very, very talented academic and cultural environment to do that successfully in.
That's good. Fantastic. I really liked this comment on the younger generation sitting at the back, and I'll bring the conversation now to a business level in New Zealand to tell you what I'm seeing when working with boards and senior leadership teams around their adoption to kind of get to the heart of, are we moving and what's holding us back in the AI game. And, you know, it's actually the young people, which is possibly not a surprise, that are driving forward movement with AI in the past year. And we're calling these young people Generation AI, like Gen AI, because they've done their final years of university with an AI assistant. And they've used that AI assistant to brainstorm ideas, to do some proofreading, to get a first draft. And if they go into an enterprise and there is no AI tool for them to use, well, then they're just going to go on the web and use something that's in the public domain. And as you can imagine, this opens up huge issues for organisations. And I'm talking about the large organisations in New Zealand who cannot have secrets put onto the internet. And so that's driven them to say, okay, well, how can we provide those tools? And now that we're investing in that, what other bits of AI should we be thinking about? And in many ways, that focus on the AI assistants, the co-pilots, it's a little bit of a distraction. And we can get good benefits from using AI like that. We're seeing, particularly in coding, really good computer science type work, really good gains. But how much is it really going to shift the needle for us if we have an AI tool to draft our emails? That's not going to solve our biggest problems. What is going to solve our problems, though, is an AI tool that can do computer vision to detect when someone's about to hurt themselves, which is something that the meat producer is looking at in New Zealand. Having AI tools that can prevent harm, AI tools that can be predictive and understand what people are wanting and improve services, and fundamentally shift organisations from being very reactive, which is where we operate now, to being predictive organisations. And that's not this new wave of AI specifically. It's the older form of AI, the machine learning form that's intertwined with agents, where you hold certain tasks to different bits of an AI kind of infrastructure, you pass it through, and most importantly, you have the data in the right order to actually get those gains.
Thank you very much to our panellists for those opening remarks. I'm going to start, Amanda, with a question that's relevant to the Gen AI folk that you referred to, perhaps some of those students sitting up there and their teachers, and also us in the university. Should or how should AI be integrated into the New Zealand curriculum? Currently, teachers in the ministry and policymakers oppose. But they also opposed the calculator and the internet. Would you like to have a little start, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Well, the first thing we know about the AI that we're using now as AI assistants is it's the worst AI we will ever use. And if it gets better, great. We don't have to worry about all of its shortcomings, but let's assume the AI doesn't get much better, that it continues to have the shortcomings it has right now, which are things like hallucinations. This is when AI makes things up. Things like inaccurate data inputs or data that's out of date. And all of the other issues that we're familiar with, we need people to understand those problems, because we're seeing in organisations across New Zealand, the workforce is using these tools and they don't understand the shortcomings because they haven't put the time into learning it. So I personally think that we should be upskilling our young people to be the change in AI and to really know when not to use it just as much as when to use it.
Thanks. Glen, would you like to make any comments?
It's somebody else's quote. The greatest risk AI presents everyone at the moment is not using AI. Most people, whether they be governments that we're addressing or large corporates or even SMEs that are developing their own AI capability, there's a big fear that they just don't know enough about it. They don't know where to look, they don't know what is right, because there is so much noise about the topic. And the AI industry doesn't help itself. It's created an entire language that is so baffling, I don't understand half of it. Whether it's deep learning, whether it's deep fakes, whether it's neurodiversitive neural networks enabled by quantitative theory, I don't even know what that is. The industry hasn't made it easy for people to see it or understand it. And when that happens, hysteria fills the void. So educators, I was on the breakfast program yesterday and I was introduced as a predominant thinker in education, which I'm not. I know very little about education at all. My highest qualification is a master's, and I barely passed that. There's fear around AI more so than any other technology that we've seen. And that fear is getting in the way of how to think sensibly about it. There's only one way to think sensibly about it that we've come to learn over the last 8 years, and that is start. But start in a way that is small. The challenge around AI is how to gain your own understanding, your own experience, and your own knowledge set around what it is in an environment that's changing rapidly. So you never get it all right. There will be plenty of mistakes, but do it in a way that is small. Do it in a way that is safe, and then you're building your own knowledge, and a knowledge in your own context, whether it's education, whether it's accounting, whether it's banking. And the faster you do that, the better armed you are to have rational discussions around AI. Now, the reality in education is we're all going to use AI. It achieves amazing things that supports the human intelligence to do better than it's done before. And the place you want to start with that is education. Usually discussions start with risk. The real risk, I think, in education and nearly every other industry is it detracts around what the key part of that industry is. So in education, you're teaching critical thinking, you're teaching critical reasoning. Well, maybe you start on what are the things that are mundane and time-wasting. Let's use AI there so there's more time for critical reasoning and the outcomes of education. So we're at the start. I think this will move forward, but it's going to take a few brave decisions to look productively and positively, not just negatively, where unfortunately, not just New Zealand, most countries are in that space at the moment.
Brandon, do we need to put it into the curriculum to reduce the risks and generate those opportunities?
Mine's a quick 10-second answer. Checks and balances. You wouldn't give someone a chainsaw and just go, cut down whatever you want. We need to have a target. We need to put the right guardrails in to support it, but it's going to happen regardless. But we might as well direct and go chop down this tree instead of just letting them go for gold.
I'm going to ask a very brief follow-up question on this. It's one of the ones here, but I only want a brief answer on this. Has AI made the PhD obsolete? Let me start with someone who has a PhD.
Yes, it has. I used a form of natural language processing that took a long time to prepare. which I could now just use with generative AI or large language models. So, yes.
PhD's obsolete,
Well,
your
in complete
master's?
contradiction, absolutely not. So I've been very, very lucky to work with some very smart PhD graduates in the US, and even a Nobel laureate in astrophysics. What a PhD does is it teaches people to think, and it teaches people to think in a very nuanced way than some of the undergrad qualifications. I wasn't sure I was going to give you this quote, given the esteemed audience that this is, so if I offend anyone, please forgive me. The first AI project we did at NASA was an engineering problem, which I won't go into, I can explain that later. And we had a 75-year-old who was really interested in AI. He was a Nobel laureate in astrophysics. We did our first project that just entirely blew us away. We had no expectation on what it was going to do. We were just playing. And the only time a human was involved was to pick this particular engineering problem up off the alloy printer, 3D printer, that was entirely designed and built by our first AI tool. It kept falling over every 5 minutes. So it took us 2 months to get the thing running. And when he saw what it did, his quote was, and forgive me, "Holy fuck. If I had these qualifications, if I had these tools now, I'm sure I would have understood string theory 10 years ago." So here is a preeminent guy who has done some fairly phenomenal work in his field that had a realization after looking at this tool, what would happen if someone like him used it? So I would argue the opposite. I think high-level qualifications, and more important now than ever, ability to reason puts people in the best position to understand how do we use these tools that we've never used before in the best possible way. And
I do wonder if Amanda's response was partly because she went through that hard slog of a PhD that some of us in the room have been through, and she can see how different it would be. So in a way, I think your comment's not completely different. It's a different approach. PhD's obsolete?
If we look at each of the industrial revolutions, the time frame extended and got shorter between each of them. Currently, with AI, we're moving at a pace where if you're actually going to spend years doing a PhD, what you started with, by the end of it's going to be obsolete. So we then need to define it differently. PhD doesn't go for 3-4 years, it goes for a year, and we restructure what it's called. But we have to move with the times.
And education goes for a lifetime, but our PhD students sitting up the back there, it might be a little different from when some of us did our PhDs, but it's still a hugely important thing to focus on. But perhaps that learning those tools and the ongoing learning of the tools. Okay, I'm going to move to something a little bit different, move into the health system, because we've got a question here. How do we speed AI implementation in a crumbling health system? How do we enable AI to safely integrate in patient treatment pathways, for example, cancer treatment delays due to specialist time constraints, or diagnostic tools, or a multidisciplinary approach to promote more patient-centric primary care? I wonder if, and I'm not sure who we should really start.
I can start with this one. The technology that is needed to actually revolutionise health in New Zealand has been around for years. There's an app called Binah. It's an Israeli tech company, B-I-N-A-H. It allows you, from your phone, put it up, it can scan, it can deal with everything from predicting cardiovascular risk, it can do your blood pressure, heart rate. If we start actually rethinking the way that a health system actually works and stop requiring everyone to go straight to the GP right at the start, but we can actually filter it down by enabling the technology in everyone's hand. It'll be a couple dollars per person for licensing. We can push it out. People can get that instant vitals information. It's stored on their own phone. If they want to submit it for government stuff, that's fine, it's consent. But in the end, there's a bunch of these technologies that they're already being used around the world. We just need to actually just use them.
It's a really good question, and it's a question I think is around human behaviour. In healthcare, you do not want to take risks, and you always want to do things, particularly driven by clinicians, that make the wider clinical team's life simpler and better, so they can do a better job, and always has a far better outcome for patients. So I'm going to use breast cancer as an example. So the challenge globally in breast cancer is demand is going through the roof. The need to undertake mammograms and have those read is outstripping demand and has done for at least the last 10 years in an extreme risky place. It takes 14 years to train a breast screening radiologist to be effective. 15 years ago in Otago Hospital, Dunedin Hospital, they had 3 radiologists and they were reading 1 slide every 40 seconds. It was entirely unsustainable. The great thing about health, particularly the New Zealand health sector, it has incredible data sets, and these are the most important assets of any AI project, the data set, not the tool. The tools are going to change, but the data that they are used to learn on. And this is one of the unique tongas that New Zealand has. We have amazing data sets in our government arenas and also private sectors. When something is so untenable that something else must happen are the moments to seize, because they open people's minds to do something differently. 2022, in Mount Cedar Hospital in New York, we ran an AI project around breast screening, and within 6 months, the AI tool was more accurate in identifying early cancers than a 20-year experienced breast screening radiologist. We don't replace that radiologist, we're just removing all of the mundane work so that we can get through far better outcomes. We first started using it as a QA tool to check the reading, and it was spotting errors for the betterment of patients so that treatment could be done earlier. So what I think is a false conversation is there are tools that will help health. Let's use them now. But one thing that is certain with AI is human behaviour. So you have to work with human behaviour to seize on the times that allow new things to happen and do it in safe and reliable ways. The reason that's important is if you have a success, it builds confidence and trust. It allows you to do the next thing, and then the next thing. And then you're looking back in 2 years, and you wonder how you ever worked without it. So I would argue AI is a success and confidence game. One misstep in the early stages, you can put yourself back in terms of the willingness to do it again. So to me, AI in health is a human behaviour game, and seizing on those times where if we just do the same thing, we'll achieve untenable outcomes.
I've got a comment, or partly a comment and partly a question that's come through that says the discussion so far sounds like a conversation about Google. The current products, Copilot, ChatGPT and so on, are already so potentially powerful that in the sphere of words and language. What is their potential now? And I guess maybe we'll take this question a little bit further. You know, what is it? So we've all got used to using Google, and of course Google has done a lot of the things, like even doing a PhD with Google is a lot easier than in the days when those of us who did them without Google did them. But what is it about AI that's that whole step up from these other sorts of technologies? And perhaps tie it in, Glen, you started talking about risks and so on. How do we manage those risks and achieve the opportunities that Brandon was highlighting are offered there? Amanda, I'm going to start with you.
That's a multifaceted one.
It is.
Yeah, so what is it better than Google? What makes it different? I think that comes back down to the fundamental definition of AI, and it's something that we often forget because we now view AI as an app, and it's a lot more than just an app. I think the key thing that differentiates AI from previous technologies is this: learning. It learns over time. You know, in the past, we've had to explicitly train things. AI, by its definition, will adapt over time. So that means it changes our ways of thinking, and it gets embedded to the technology that already exists, which is the other really important element here. So we often talk about the Internet of Things. This is devices that we have around to sense, to feel, to suspect. You know, we build AI into that and allows adaptation over time and improvements over time. Same with robotics, and this is something that I'm really excited about for New Zealand over the coming year. I think we're about to see the wave of AI come to New Zealand. I think we're about to see huge advances that will make it easier. But robotics is its own thing, and it's being fueled by AI, and that will also allow huge advancements there. So for me, it really comes down to that fact that it can continue to learn and evolve.
Interesting point. Brandon, would you add anything to Amanda's comments on that?
I think we need to stop assuming that AI is just like ChatGPT and Google and everything else. Like, if you imagine every sentence that you have, that can be replaced through the use of AI. It's really interesting, and especially if you look at, I guess, the economic impact, because we are at an economics group right now. If we take an example of, look at attendance for school taking. Attendance is taken once a day in primary, twice a day for intermediate, 5 times a day for high school. It takes roughly around 5 minutes. If you add up every one of those 5 minutes, it ends up being, I think it's like 89.9 full school days. If you look at that, that's half a year of education is taken up by just roll taking. We could have replaced and improved our education system a long time ago by just using like facial recognition in classrooms for attendance. Singapore has done it, China's done it, lots of other countries in the world have done it. But if you look at it from an actual economic impact perspective, that's half a year over a child's entire education. Like, we need to be rethinking how we use AI in different ways than just replacing Google or from a ChatGPT perspective.
And we've got a bunch of our staff from our China campus who are visiting at the moment, and they're using facial recognition for all of their teaching rooms now. Those students, they all go to class. It's rather different from what we sometimes see in our New Zealand classrooms. So do have a chat to our guys from China if you're interested in learning more about what's happening in education in China. I'm going to move to a question that kind of links us back to the macro policy session that we were working on before. There was quite a bit of a talk in that session about productivity, because of course productivity is hugely important at the macro level. What can we expect in terms of productivity gains from AI, and over what sort of timeline can we expect those gains in productivity from AI? Glen, I'm going to start with you, since I didn't
Thanks, good Lord.
go in the first one. I know you're thinking.
For me, that's a really hard question to answer. So the easy answer is the productivity benefits are astronomical, and it'll achieve great things in the adoption of AI, which of course is true. But the real answer is it all depends on the industry and what's happening in it and what the competitive pressures are. So most countries, I think possibly more so in New Zealand in its history now than ever, is just a little bit slow. We've all come out of COVID. For us in New Zealand, we didn't have that many colleagues that passed away. In the US, the number of colleagues that passed away, a very different experience over there. So I think we can beat ourselves a little bit up a bit too much, looking at we're just not moving as fast as we thought we would. I think that time's to come, and I think it's to come pretty soon, because we just cannot stay in this current position, not because we're lazy, not because we don't want to. Competitive pressures will pull us. Some will lead, some will follow, some will be forced to make change. I think we're going to see, like many changes in technology, gradual change early on. But when I say early on, I don't mean the next 5 years, I mean the next year. Everything around AI and its opportunities is really compressed. And I think we'll see some make early changes. I think we'll see some organisations, government or private, copy what others are doing and adopt that in better ways themselves, which is by far my most preferred strategy. Far easier to learn from others and then do even slightly better yourself than forge that new ground. But of course, it's a bit chicken and egg, depending on your situation. You might have to be first. You may have no option about it. So I think we'll see things move slowly. I think as confidence and experience grows with people, then things will move rapidly fast. It's that old story, how do you become a billionaire? Well, really, really slow, then really fast. How do you become broke? Well, really, really slow, but then really fast. And I think we'll see the same thing around AI. I'll come back to my earlier statement I made. When there's a compelling reason that something must be done, that is the fertile ground. And if I take health as another example, you could never have enough clinicians. It's just not possible to have the number of docs it takes to train to meet what we need now. So the only option we have is how do we give them better tools? So I think when situations like that occur, we'll see those industries moving fast. They may seem like laggards at the moment, but just the sheer environment will force it to move fast. Space exploration is a little bit similar. You're always doing something for the first time, doing something that's never been done before. If it fails, it's so publicly visible. So what forces them to adopt new technologies is how to make things better and safer so that risk is reduced. And I would argue that's true for any industry. So, long way of answering, I don't think we'll see massive change in the very, very short term, but I think in the immediate term, 2 to 3 years, when you're back at this forum in 3 years' time, I bet the AI conversation is dramatically different from the one we're having today.
We'll check it out next year and see whether that, initially you said 1 year. Brendan, your experience in where you're working, productivity gains, timelines?
I guess it comes down to rephrasing one thing. Instead of going, who can solve this, we start asking ourselves, how can we solve it? Because what we do is we currently throw people at everything, instead of just rephrasing or readjusting the question on the process of how we go about doing this. This is effective for both public and private sector as well. Those are the most successful companies that we've ever worked with that stops requiring a human to be part of the actual question. It comes down to, we have a problem, let's rethink the entire process.
Thanks. And while we're on this topic of productivity, we've got a question on our panel's thoughts on the impact of AI on employment, which of course is very linked to productivity. Amanda, from your perspective, impacts of AI on employment, are we all going to lose our jobs? Are we all going to have a whole lot more work? What's going to be the impact on employment?
Right now, the rate limiting factor of AI is organisational change, not technology. And I think fundamentally, the question is still very open as to how we can use AI alongside our work. The general sentiment in the literature around AI augmenting work is this idea that it will take away tasks that we do in our job. But I think that's a really simple way of looking at it, and we're really just thinking about those AI assistants, again, if we talk about that. And that is not AI, that is a part of it, but it's not all of AI. I think we really need to ask ourselves 2 questions, which is AI, where can we use it to do work that we're currently doing better? And that's where it's going to impact what we know as our work right now. But also, it's also going to make us do different things in our organisations. And many of the jobs that exist today will not exist in the future. And a lot of the students going through university today will be doing jobs that don't exist now. And that's just part of change. So for me, it's not something I'm particularly concerned about because we know about how technology change in general goes, right? I think I'm talking to the converted with a room of economists.
Comments on jobs? Is it going to displace more than it creates?
I don't think it will displace more than it creates, but it will displace roles that are obviously a fit where AI can be more productive than a person. And I think that will happen quite fast. So if I'm a student, I'm probably not going to be a junior accountant. I probably wouldn't go there. I'm probably not going to be a quantity surveyor. But to give you a sense of, in more recent times, how that change has happened, we had an engineering firm that we used for a lot of design for a particular company I'm involved with. That was about a 10-person design team. We don't use them anymore. We use one AI team. But that AI team is quite a different thing. The AI team has a data scientist in it. It has AI technicians in it. It has a philosopher in it. Because one of the challenges we have, although we can do something, should we do it? Who knew philosophy would be such an important topic of understanding how to apply AI? So I think what we'll generally see is an uplifting of doing the things humans are good at and using tools to help humans do even better than they could have done before and remove the mundane. I think that's in the foreseeable future. There are other things that I think becomes very science fiction, and this gets really risky when we talk about AI, is when can AI replace human intelligence? And you will hear weird comments. One is the human brain can only undertake so many transactions a second, and AI can do 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000,000 times better. Yes, that's true. But what I hope and I don't think will happen is the uniqueness around creativity and reasoning that a human brings to the equation. Never say never. I think it's extremely difficult to replace. Not because maybe it can't be done technically, but I think there is a human endeavour that humans will not want to lose, the thing that makes what we achieve genuinely human and the nature about us. I think there'll be a couple of missteps around that journey, but I think that's for the way for the future. I think it's more practical to look at what helps us now, then what's the best way to do it. And unlike any other technology revolution, whether it's the industrial revolution, this one will happen much, much faster. And I think we will see those roles that are more rote in nature move away quite quickly, but not in every industry and not at the same time.
So we've got our audience asking, can you provide recent examples and user cases that the New Zealand government and enterprises have adopted and the benefits they've gained, for example, in minimising harm, as Amanda indicated? So I guess we've talked overall about these potential productivity gains and so on, but our audience is interested, does our panel have any specific examples from government or enterprise?
I'll be a bit provocative. So in government, there are ministers that are rock stars in every government. New Zealand, whether it's the US, government as a whole generally is a bit average. So you have to pick the rock stars, those that are going to drive things forward if you're looking at change in government. If I look at governments that have succeeded really well around change in government, they've given the task to the rock star. And because I'm no longer employed by a government department, last two successive governments in New Zealand, innovation has usually been given to ministers on the descending, not the ascending. So I think we've got the political view around a technology and essentially a discipline all of its own, AI. Where do we put it in a governance sense? And you've got to pick the rock stars. You'll all know who they are. And then government has a chance of succeeding. Government departments, doesn't matter what country you're in, they don't want to upset their minister. So if AI is a positive thing, then governments will act positively. At the moment, in some countries, it's defensive. The breast screening example that I spoke to you about earlier, we were trying to do that in New Zealand. We blew $1.5 million. We took it to New York. One of the most bureaucratic, difficult health sectors to work in, that was the place we could innovate. So, controversial comment, I think it's unusual, the current New Zealand setting around politics and innovation, because we have such a strong history of doing it so well. And I think that will turn.
We didn't quite get a specific example there. We got some examples where it's not happening, but can you take a more positive, specific examples?
So large company in New Zealand, a company that everyone here would know, we ended up introducing AI to analyse the calls coming through. We pulled out what their question was, and we prompted to the operator the most likely response to give back. Reduced call times by about 45%, and it's projected to save them $12 million over the next 5 years. It's a good use case. Everyone wins. Nobody wants to be on hold for so long. Second one, large engineering company in New Zealand. They traditionally spend hundreds of hours writing reports for things like geotech reports and a bunch of other stuff. We managed to reduce their time to release that report by, I think it was about 94%. Instead of charging on a per hour basis, they switched to a fixed price basis. Their margins went through the roof. It's very functional and great use cases. There's military drones flying around New Zealand tracking Maui dolphins using AI to scan down. So after the White Island disaster, putting on AI-enabled cameras onto the helicopters to go through and scan to ensure that we don't lose bodies again in the future. There is a series of multiple use cases which are being done. Government's always going to be a little bit cagey on not sharing those.
Those examples that you gave us, Brandon, what would you say is the job impact if we link that back to that previous question? Is it creating jobs? Is it reducing jobs?
There's two parts. So we need to consider, it's very, very easy to go, let's just replace, I guess, junior staff. But no one's really thinking what happens in 3 or 5 years. Those juniors need to become intermediates and seniors. Even though it's an immediate cost saving in the short term, a lot of these groups will be affected in 3 to 5 years when they've got no one to replace their intermediates and seniors, which AI can't replace their job. So it's just ensuring that everyone thinks not just the short-term gain, but it's also the medium and long-term.
If I can add to this as well, we implemented a similar tool in the call centre and measured the impact of it, not just on productivity, which was a whopping 76% increase in productivity, which is really, really quick by providing them with the answers. But what was really interesting for the worker was that we did a survey before they started using the AI tool and then one afterwards. And we asked them a bunch of questions. One of them was actually their satisfaction with their work and how frustrated they were with their work. And that is where we saw 3/4 of respondents had a significant increase in work satisfaction. So there's the present day benefits of using AI tools as well. And then we've got the future ones, which I thought was a really good point you raised. One thing that we're thinking about is that kind of pyramid that you have in organizations. You know, you often have quite a large junior workforce and it gets a bit more senior, there are fewer people. Well, because of AI, we might see that triangle become a lot more narrow, and the implications that you highlighted, I think, are very, very interesting for New Zealand with a brain drain. So let's keep watching that area.
You know, Amanda, the other comment in that question was that you mentioned the harm reduction possibilities. Would you like to speak a little bit more about potential harm reduction possibilities, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is the well-being one that we talked about then. I think right now we're all trying to do more with less in organisations, and government organisations are absolutely in that camp. So we've got the personal well-being. We also know we've got a well-being crisis going on with a lot of our young people. So we've got the potential to use AI to support in those areas as well. So changing the nature of work, we've got well-being, providing AI to help support and tutor people through different situations. But then you've got the tools that look like what you're mentioning there when you have cameras in different areas. Well, AI right now, out of the box, you can get AI tools that can detect everyone in this room, can describe what you're wearing, can tell you how close things are to one another. Right now, with spending no money, this is all open source. You can get that working. So this is what...
Oh, no, it was 9 years ago, one of my first ever big public talks. I had a camera and it was analysing the audience's face to see what their sentiment was between my business partner and myself. And we threw up the results right at the end. Yeah, it was unconsented, but we threw the results up at the end. Everyone hated my talk, and they loved his from a sentiment perspective. I had to learn public speak better after that one. But
did you watch them win us?
I stood there like this.
Maybe that's something we need to think about next year, Matt. Yeah. Okay, we've got a question, and it doesn't quite fit in with the current track that we were on, so we may come back to this, but it's a question that's proving very popular. And I wonder whether our panellists have got any insights on this. How do we balance the carbon emissions and water consumption of AI, especially when they're used for simple tasks like email writing, essays and so on, instead of strategic, wide-reaching things that couldn't be achieved another way? So if we think about these environmental impacts of AI, should we be concerned about them? How do we balance them with the benefits? Brandon, you've got a big smile on your face there.
No, my answer is go nuclear, but it's not going to be super positive to half the audience.
Well, Matt said we didn't all have to agree, but I think that might be a difficult thing in New Zealand at present, at least. But are you concerned about it? Do you think it's something
the energy requirements to power the stuff that we're doing, it is going to exceed the way that we're currently producing power over the next 10, 15 years. If you're buying stock, buy nuclear stock right now. But in New Zealand, we do need to rethink how we're actually creating energy. And I do think we need to have those arguments around different sources that aren't just wind, hydro, and solar.
Glen, any thoughts on environmental impacts?
Yeah, it's a big concern. AI is incredibly energy hungry, and our networks won't deal with it. So if we were to Google, write me a report about Waikato University, throw that into ChatGPT and say, tell me the nuances of why I should study here, and make that in 2 pages, it would probably require that much water to cool the energy needed to do just that task. So power and new forms of power are going to be absolutely critical. A company in New Zealand, OpenStar Technologies, one of the world's leaders in plasma, which essentially is creating a sun in a laboratory to drive energy through. So those sorts of initiatives are going to have to be hand in hand to allow AI to grow. Otherwise, we're going to be constrained by power. Now, solar is not going to be the complete answer. There's pros and cons, so it's going to have to be new ways of doing things. The other demands on electricity are not just AI. There are all sorts of other technologies as well. So power is definitely going to be a place that needs new ways of creating it. So it's going to be one of the constrictions. Definitely the answer is not coal, but as we sit here today, the answer for many countries probably is coal. So a growth in AI, potentially in the shorter term, is going to also be a growth in climate challenge.
Brandon's got some answers, but also we do have an energy panel tomorrow, so it will be something we come back to. Did you want to make any?
Yeah, I would say it's important to recognise, though, a little bit of nuance around AI here. One is often you'll see kind of alarmist headlines around AI and power, but it's important to understand the difference between inference. When you're creating models, sometimes when you're using them, it has a different power use than when you create them, is one. And the second bit of nuance that's worth noting is that the models are not static. They are changing all the time, and they're getting a lot better. So there might, hopefully, be smarter models in the future that don't require as much energy, we can hope.
Let's move now from one tricky issue of environmental concerns to another tricky issue of ethical considerations. What ethical considerations should be prioritised as AI continues to evolve? How can we ensure it develops responsibly? And in particular, how should the government in New Zealand regulate and protect creatives, intellectual property and so on in this rapidly evolving environment? Brandon, I suspect you're going to say they're not going to have too much hope, but I wonder if, what are the ethical considerations? Should regulation be a part of it?
It comes down to constant improvement. We need to introduce, I guess, an ability to fail. And we do need to review every time that we make a mistake. Like, as a community, there's only a few voices that are actually defining where our ethics are. My ethics is a lot different than everyone else here. Well, maybe not some people. But at the moment, we're trying to define things without actually understanding what the impact of everything is going to be. Things are going to be good, things are going to be bad. We're going to have models that are going to predict things and profile people. There's going to be bias and things. But as long as we go into it with an attitude of constant change and constant improvement with constant acknowledgement, we can experiment a lot quicker. What's going to happen is the paralysis strategy. We're stuck in this going, just talk about ethics, just talk about bias, let's talk about everything, but then we don't do anything. And that's the problem. That's the reason why we've dropped from 9 to number 40 now, because we're just not doing anything. Personally, I'd rather fail once every million times and then move forward. But yeah, I'm not going to dig
Can you
myself a hole.
clarify that drop 9 to number 40? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, it's based on, I think it was one of the Oxford global surveys. It dropped us down significantly over the last few years. And what's the Milton Friedman quote? It's like, the most eternal thing you can get to is government bureaucracy, and nothing ever changes. So unless we actually do make some change. or something more positive?
Ethical considerations, do we need regulation?
No, I would say in New Zealand we're in a good place in some sense, which is that we've got a Privacy Act, which does put us in a really nice position for having something. I've seen some great thought leadership come out from the AI forum on this, which would be worth checking out though. And I'd say, you know, a lot of our organisations have standards internally for their technology. And it's not rocket science. They can follow a trustworthy AI framework themselves, and when they want to work globally, they'll often be having to adhere to more global policies like the AI Act in the EU as well.
The problem is, though, that the Privacy Act really doesn't enforce much. Like, even with the amendments that were made, there's like no penalisation for really abuse, except for a minor fine.
So no problem if we have a computer here looking at everyone's faces.
Yeah, that's probably not a great example. But I think we do need to actually enhance the protections around, especially around individuals' privacy and protection of information.
I think it was a great example when I saw some of the expressions on people's faces, wondering if we were doing that now. Glen, any thoughts on...
I couldn't agree with Brandon more. Ethics is critically important. The most valuable asset our country has is its data, and it's incredibly valuable. We've got to be careful with it. New Zealand was one of the larger contributors to the EU Bletchley report on AI safety, which was released this week, and it's one of our strengths. We're very strong in ethics, but ethics can be used in different ways. It can be used as a blocker that raises all sorts of risks and scares people, and to Brandon's point, ethics in a productive way allow you to do new things in an informed way. So we've all got a maturity journey to go on in that front. But the ethics, usually for most AI projects, is the first place to start because it helps you to understand when you're trying to achieve an outcome, what are the intended outcomes, but what are also the unintended outcomes, particularly when something is rapidly changing. And it's important, particularly if it's government data sets, for public to have trust. So regulation and the right bounds are really important. But in AI, they're going to need to move radically quickly to ensure that we keep up. And regulation's not used to doing that. So that's going to be a regulatory challenge. New Zealand, luckily, is well connected to many of the international ethics and regulatory forums. So we're already in a good position to learn off other countries and see what they're doing. Ethics can be polarised. It can often be seen as a reason not to do something, or let's just ignore ethics and do something. You must not ignore ethics. You must not ignore data privacy, and you must be incredibly considerate around what are you doing with the data, what changes are you making, and are we hurting the integrity of that data? I don't mean just the letters and the numbers. I mean the integrity of whose data it is. What are the perceptions of what you're doing? How can you ensure if it's public data, the public is coming with you and feeling safe? So sometimes it's a bigger question than just we're solving a problem. It tends to be much wider, and particularly around public data, the first steps are critically important around large change, because you're showing to the public, we've done something really great with your data, your tonga, but we're also protecting it in really, really strong ways. And the only way public can see that is by doing and proving. So I'm pleased New Zealand public is cautious. I think risks in this space are really dangerous, but not too cautious. We don't actually achieve things.
If I can add just one small thing here, which is every organisation that I've spoken to, it is the first thing that they are thinking about. They are thinking about ethics, they are thinking about trustworthy AI. It's front of mind for New Zealand.
It's also front of mind for our audience, and there's lots of questions here, and I can see we've got 2 minutes left on the clock here. Feel free to find our panellists during the break, the rest of the day. There's fascinating questions on, does this AI-generated social media comments, what's that doing to us? I mean, these are fascinating questions. We've just really touched on some of the depth of this rapidly emerging topic. But I'm going to wrap up by giving each of our panellists just 30 seconds to give a summary comment on AI. Is it overhyped, or is it really the great disruptor?
Yes, it's massively overhyped, and it's going to be such a massive disruptor that we can't even comprehend. One last comment, as I get to speak all over the world on AI, it is unusual that you have in an organisation like Waikato Uni that has one of the most developed AI centres in New Zealand, partly if not the world. My colleagues are not talking heads. They do this for a living. They're experienced people. That is unusual when I'm on a panel. And it is, I think, critically important not to have an expert in AI mediator in this panel, but an economist, an internationally renowned economist. So when I sit here, this is unusual. I don't usually get this opportunity in this way. It's usually more generic conversations than the one we're having.
And you sounded like an economist when you said you'd go with both two hands there. Amanda?
I think there's huge potential, but in New Zealand, we often lack the scale to get the benefits from AI if we want to build ourselves. So we need to be able to find AI that is affordable for us, that we can bring into our system. And most importantly, we haven't talked about data much today, but the biggest benefits from AI for New Zealand organisations will often require them getting their data foundations right. So that's a thing I'll leave the group with.
We have the opportunity to solve a lot of our biggest nation's problems over the next 10 years if we actually do implement AI from a disruption perspective. By 2035, 1 in 4 New Zealanders will be over 65. AI is a great tool for us to actually reduce the burden on us as taxpayers. But if you start profiling that across everything from an industry, if we don't start jumping on and disrupting, we're going to be outdone by other groups around the world. So it is disruption. Most technology has been available for the last 5 to 7 years. It's just now it's become economically available for us to actually implement on scale.
It's a nice positive comment to end on, and I guess if we think back, the Economics Forum's been running for 5 years, and the huge changes we've seen even during this time, it's probably something we're going to need to come back to regularly. I do thank our panellists very much. It's an evolving space. This is a difficult space to be the world's experts on because it's just rapidly evolving, but they've brought wonderful insights and rich, including practical examples. So thank you very much, and I'm sure you're going to have lots of people trying to find you during the breaks to follow up on some of these.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you to Anna and to the panel. All right, that was the morning session completed. We are now going to break for lunch. A bit after 12, we need to be seated back at 1 o'clock in the room. So just after lunch, we have gifted Sir Brian Roach the prime slot. Sir Brian, of course, after a pretty storied career in the public and private sector, in his first 100 days as the Public Service Commissioner. So many of the topics that we've heard about this morning and that we will hear about come to issues of public policy and therefore are integral to the public service. So really looking forward to hearing from Sir Brian that. And then shortly after that, we'll break into 2 rooms for a session on local government and a parallel session on genetic engineering and gene technologies. So a lot still to come. Lunch will be served around the area behind the stairs there. So enjoy that, and we'll be seated back again at 1 p.m. Thank you.